First of all, I'd like to thank the Center for Bhutan Studies and GNH and all of the esteemed teachers and fellow presenters and everybody who's here. So I want to begin by telling a little bit about myself. I am not a scholar. I come here as a Buddhist practitioner, teacher, but also as a chaplain. Is the mic okay? The mic is okay?
Yes.
Okay. And so within the context of the United States, chaplains provide spiritual, emotional support and pastoral guidance. And what I'm going to be discussing about is not what the new Western Vajrayana is, but what are some of the difficulties I've seen, some of the challenges, and then also some of the really beautiful things that I've seen within the context of Vajrayana coming to the West, broadly speaking, and then also the impact that Western culture has on Himalayan cultures and Vajrayana practice more broadly. So, next slide. So out of humor, I included this quote from Brian Eno, a musician I love. But the point of this quote, if you study the logistics and heuristics of the mystics, you will find that their minds rarely move in a line, is really to kind of highlight the fact that this is all one big experiment. And one of the fascinating things for me when I first connected to Vajrayana was reading namtars, spiritual biographies. And in so doing, everything would always look so neat. Milarepa's story, while long and complicated, still had an arc. He reached liberation at the end. Marpa's story, same thing. And so it's very easy to think that our Dharma practice, our Vajrayana Dharma practice in particular, will also be very nice and neat, but it's not. It's messy. And so we make moves, and we make moves to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha in our own way. So next slide. What I'm particularly fascinated with at this point is this idea of spreading Dharma and thinking differently about it. And there are three different metaphors I like to use. The first is this idea of transmigration. So transmigration is a transitive verb, meaning to cause to go from one state of existence to another. So within the context of Bhutan, this culture that is so heavily laden with precious Dharma, what does it mean to go from Bhutan to where I live, New York City? It's a very, very different thing. The second, can we go back? The second is phase change. And here I steal a little bit from early chemistry, looking at Robert Boyle's gas law, how he described how ice, when you apply heat, transforms into water, and when you apply more heat, transforms into steam or gas. So it's the same thing. How does Vajrayana Dharma move through all of these phases into ways that are particularly meaningful in the Western context? And then the last I've stolen from the scholar David Germano, this idea of remembering, but not in the sense of remembering in your mind, but putting back together. So how does Dharma, Vajrayana Dharma in particular, help me or any one of us here come together again as whole beings that are awakened? So as a chaplain, using these three metaphors, I've been doing a lot of exploration with students, with people I work with, and just in conversation with scholars and Dharma practitioners around, what's going on? How's this working? So next slide. So I'd like to, this is a rather long quote. This is from Longchenpa, and there's going to be a following one by Suraha. And I'm sharing these quotes to really highlight what the essence is, as I see it, of Dharma. You can't go wrong with Longchenpa, you can't go wrong with Suraha. So Longchenpa says, mind itself is a vast expanse, the realm of unchanging space. Its indeterminate display is the expanse of the magical expression of its responsiveness. Everything is the adornment of basic space and nothing else. Outwardly and inwardly, things proliferating and resolving are the dynamic energy of the awakened mind. Because this is nothing whatsoever, yet arises as anything at all, is a marvelous and a magical expression, amazing and superb. Throughout the entire universe, all beings and all that manifests as form are adornments of basic space. Arising is the ongoing principle of enlightened form. What is audible, all sounds and voices without exception, as many as there may be, are adornments of basic space. Arising is the ongoing principle of enlightened speech. All consciousness and all stirring and proliferation of thoughts, as well as the inconceivable range of non-conceptual states, are adornments of basic space. Arising is the ongoing principle of enlightened mind. So this is the key. And so, knowing that this is the key, how then to apply this and how then to manifest this in the West. So, next slide. And here we see Saraha, a little bit more boisterous. Hey! Wearing matted locks, grasping at the self and agent, Brahmins, Jains, hedonists, materialists accepting the real basis for things, claim omniscience, but don't know themselves. They're deluded and far from the path of liberation. Vaibhashikas, Sautrantikas, Yogacharans, Madhyamikas, etc. criticize each other and argue, ignorant of the space-like quality of appearance and emptiness itself. They turn their backs on the innate. Body, speech, and mind are resplendent like cotton in an oil lamp. Endowed with just that, they are radiant like a lamp that is self-illuminating. Because illuminating reflexive awareness pervades all beings indivisibly, that is the unborn nature. And so this too, from a slightly different angle, really highlights what the key of Vajrayana practice is. So again, how to transfer that from one cultural container into another. Next slide. So, I'm taking a little risk here. So, thinking differently. A lot of people here, and earlier this morning we heard a little bit about Tilopa's instructions. In this particular case, Tilopa's 6 nails. And I'm using this here not necessarily, well, in one way as the meditation instruction, but another way, almost like a Tilopian analysis of how to engage this process and what comes next. So the first, don't recall. Let go of what's past. And everyone here knows to not hold on to what you had for breakfast, or what somebody said yesterday, or how well we slept last night, or what happened when we were 5 years old. And in the same way, what I think is important is to not hold on to the past. The Vajrayana past is incredible. It's rich. It's dynamic, and it's what caused all of us to be here right now. So we can hold that in our heart, and we can let go. And then the next instruction. Back? Yeah. Don't imagine. Let go of what may come. So what in the world will come? We don't know. So while we can speculate and we can care for the Dharma so that as it manifests in a way that's skillfully, maybe we can let this go too. Don't think, let go right now. So right now I'm very nervous, and maybe you can hear this in my voice. So I am trying to let go right now of what is happening in this moment. But maybe a little bit more broadly, what does it mean for us to be able to let go of the pressure of trying to figure out what Western Vajrayana is? In one particular way, it comes through all of us here, whether it's Kalaramche or Dobotugu or anyone here, whether you're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, we are the present moment of Dharma. So if we can just relax into that, maybe we can be more receptive and more connected. Don't examine, don't try to figure anything out. In my life, every time I try to figure out what is going on, it becomes a mess. Right? So perhaps we can just let go and trust. The next, don't control. This is very difficult, and actually going back to the Wim Hof lecture, trying to control which way the study of Tummo should go, trying to control whether or not something is appropriate or timely or skillful or anything. Maybe we can just let that go as well and just see what happens. And then the last instruction, my favorite, rest, relax right now, and rest. So, obviously this is a very key Mahamudra instruction from the Mahasiddha Tilopa, but it's fascinating to use this slightly differently within the context of trying to determine what's going on, what's going to happen, where are we moving. So next slide. Okay. So thinking differently, complexities in need of addressing. And this is very complex. So I'm going to go over very, very quickly. What is really fascinating to me are these layered colonialisms. In one particular way, you could say the Vajrayana world is colonizing the West. And in the same way, the West, with respect to its Orientalism and spiritual bypassing, is trying to colonize the East. It's very hard for these two cultures to actually effectively see one another. And then layered traumas. I find it fascinating that trauma in the Tibetan community in particular, with respect to the Chinese invasion of Tibet and the cultural destruction therein, may not have been studied as much as it perhaps should. And then similarly, we could easily make the argument, I can definitely say this as an American, our culture is inherently traumatizing to the people within it. The impact of global capitalism with respect to time. When am I going to get enlightened? I put in all of this work. When will it come? And all of the ways that capitalism impacts the way we think, the way our relationship to production. Homegrown Buddhism versus hybrid Buddhism. So parent culture Buddhism, like Bhutan, Tibet, Sikkim, Nepal, and the United States, or continental Europe. And then underrepresented voices in Vajrayana. This is a very fascinating one in the United States. How to be able to pull in underrepresented communities without voice, Latinx community, African American community, communities that we don't typically see in Vajrayana Dharma spaces in the West. Next slide. And then thinking differently about these present developments. So as a chaplain, I'm finding that chaplaincy in the United States is weaving Vajrayana approaches into end-of-life spiritual care in a very meaningful way that is changing the way we think of death. And this is one really beautiful way that Vajrayana is really changing Western culture. Also, I'm seeing reliance on Buddha nature and the view of Longchenpa, for example, as a way to return to a Vajrayana approach that nurtures community development as a way of addressing pluralism, systemic oppressions, including gender, race, ability, class, sexual orientation, and sexual identity. And then enculturation, this process of change, changing. So I would like to get to the next slide. And then inclusivity. Given the very concept of Buddha nature and the basis of the Tantric Samayas, in a pluralistic society like you find in the West, Vajrayana Buddhism must address sexism, racism, homophobia, ableism, and other forms of bias. They're out of sync with Western values. And this is a very interesting kind of discrepancy between what you might find in traditional cultures and the West. And then abuse of power, transparency as a way of serving the sangha, and then the mahasangha more broadly. Next slide. And possible future arisings. So I'm going to go from the bottom first. There seems to be an increasing number of people who are interested. Okay, was that all three? Or two? Okay, good. There seem to be a lot of threads of people trying to breathe life into Mahasiddha practice, right? This very kind of dynamic, in-the-moment life practice, or reviving this tradition to help empower practitioners to take refuge in their direct awakening, no matter the form and no matter the implication. And this is a really beautiful development. And also this point about culture. Dharma is not created by culture, yet culture plays a direct role in how Dharma is made manifest in a way that we can all experience it. So it's worth bearing in mind that although Dharma has no limitations, culture often does. And so keeping this cultural change in mind is important. Last slide. And these are what we need to fight. The maras of hope and fear, so Milarepa, perhaps, confirmation bias, spiritual bypassing, spiritual materialism, and especially the rigidity and dogmatism that comes with, in my opinion, overly orthodox practice that has its feet stuck in the ground when the world itself is changing. And last slide. We have a bright path ahead of us. The dynamic ability to meet the needs of sentient beings is one of the many powerful characteristics of Vajrayāna as it continues to spread across the world and through the mind streams and activities of people in diverse cultures. There's no end to the benefit that's created. And so, there you have it. Thank you very much.